start recording so we can turn it over to Sean.
Well, thank you and welcome. This is Traveling in Our Period. We're going to be talking about how people traveled, where they traveled, and what they ate, and some really weird stuff I turned up as I was researching this. I am a pelican in the West Kingdom. I am also an apprentice to a cooking Laurel. The person, can you see that? Or did it come out backwards?
No, it does
did the
not.
translation of this book. Okay, so this book, The Science of Cooking and a Medieval Transylvanian Cookbook, is online. And so you don't have to buy the physical copy. I like to pet and touch, so I got a physical copy of it. It is an awesome little book, all sorts of weird stuff in there. And feel free to ask questions as we're going along. I would like your help in keeping me on track. So if you come up with some weird esoteric thing that you want to talk about, put it in the chat pod. That is awesome. But I'd like to hold off on answering it till we get to the end, because once I get off track, I lose the train. So, traveling in period. For a lot of our period, just traveling because you wanted to travel was kind of frowned on. That was more of a incitement to the not virtues, but going on pilgrimage was a good thing. You had to get permission to go on pilgrimage from whomever was in charge of your life, and that also included the religious aspects of your life. I talked to a man in England who does all sorts of odd stuff to raise money for the homeless, and he did a pilgrimage from, to Canterbury, and he actually went ahead and got permission from the bishop to be able to go on pilgrimage. So he had his little letter with him and all of his stuff. It was kind of fun to do. So there are a lot of different ways that you could travel. You could certainly go on foot. You could go on horseback or muleback. You could go on camel. You could go in carts. You could go on shipboard. Shipboard is a little dicey because of, sea monsters. And the kind of food that you got to eat was pretty much what you brought with you, and there weren't a whole lot of other options available to you. All those stories you hear about hardtack and about weevils in them, there are lists and lists of pilgrims' itineraries where they talk about the weevils in the food and eating in the dark and making carved boxes out of their hardtack rather than actually eating it. And apparently someone must have done some research, because that stuff will last 50 years. So if we were going to go on foot, certainly people can travel about 10 to 20 miles a day, depending. And in England, Stephen Payne told me that the rest stops are about 12 miles apart. So that was the general walking distance in one day for a pilgrim. Horses will travel at about 5 miles an hour at a walk. Okay? And if you're traveling all day, you aren't galloping about the countryside, because you and your horse will get tired. But you are figuring that you're going to go about 5 miles an hour on your travel. So you're going to go 15 to 20 miles in a day on a horse. England did not do too much with mules, because the English donkey was rather small. So if you had a mule to ride on, it came from somewhere other than England, most likely. There's not a lot of evidence of mules in period from England. Camels do about 30 miles a day. So if you're in the areas where camels are common, you might get to go a little faster. Mules, however, can carry more weight than a horse. And they also have a greater range of feedstuffs they can live off of and they will do well on, rather than a horse, which has got a little bit more tender tummy. And they do tend to be more stubborn. There are other aspects about mules that tend to be both good and bad. So a lot of people still ride mules. A lot of people ride mules in period. Armies with baggage tend to go about 8 miles a day. You've got to gather all that stuff up, pack it up, go your distance, and still unpack in daylight. Pack animals tend to carry about 300 to 400 pounds in packs and went 15 to 25 miles a day in the army. There's some exceptions to that if you look. King Harold of England went tearing across the countryside to get up to King Harold's and Stamford Bridge and that whole battle, and he went 250 miles in 4 days. On the other hand, that was summer in friendly territory. So food and remounts would have been readily available. Then, unfortunately, after winning the battle at Stamford Bridge, he had to turn around and tear all the way back down the countryside to take care of William, and that didn't work out so well for him. The Roman rest stops were about 8 to 12 miles apart, and the baggage trains were expected to go 240 miles in about 10 days, but couriers were expected to do that in 1 day. So they changed horses at every rest stop and get going. That gives you an idea of how far you could go at a fast speed on a horse. All right. Harold, let's see, I already talked about Harold. Nero went 300 miles in 7 days with his army, and then turned around and went back in, I think, 9 days is what it was. But then that 7 days, he managed to get to where he needed to be and have his troops ready to fight. So it wasn't too fast a pace for them. Any questions so far? Doing okay? All right. This is the hardest part about teaching online is nobody has a face for me to look at. I see pictures and names. So hey, bear with me. Okay, bear with me because all of my feedback from my audience isn't happening. So I may drift a little bit. So what did we take? First of all, if you are traveling with a pack animal or on horseback, there's something called the 10-day rule. And the 10-day rule is you can carry enough supplies for you and your, we're just going to stick with horse, you and your horse for about 10 days. Carry more than that, you're carrying more weight, so you go more slowly. Carry less than that, you don't get to go for as far. So that's a general rule of thumb for mounted armies for a really long time. I was not ever able to find a list in any of the Pilgrim's itineraries of the kinds of tools you might take with you. So I went and took a look at a list from the 18th and 19th century pioneers. And what did they take? Since they're still based on animal transport, my assumption is that it's not all that different. So we looked at things like blankets and axes and tents and knives and hammers and hatchets. Let's see, what else do I have here? Saws and scissors, needle and thread, leather tools, rope, always take your rope, beeswax, tallow, soap, candles, medicines, lanterns. Those are the kinds of things that they found useful when traveling across the continent of what is now the United States. William Way, who did 2 pilgrimages between 1450 and 1462, had a very nice itinerary and made a list of the things he thought were useful. And pilgrims did this a lot. They made itineraries, they discussed what they saw. Some of it is a little bit fanciful. And if you have a copy of the Pilgrim's Guide to Santiago, it's been translated. I have a copy of it. It's hysterically funny to read. And then if we have time at the end, I'll run around the corner and go get the book and pull it out and read you some things. But William Way thought you should take confections, cordials, laxatives, restoratives, spices, dried fruit, ginger, flour, figs, pepper, saffron, cloves, and chickens. I'm not sure I'd take the chickens, but what the heck. So the other sorts of things you might consider taking would be dried peas and beans. If you are planning on eating dried peas and beans and you haven't tried to actually cook from dried peas or beans before, they have to soak for a really long time before they're ready to be boiled and made into soup. So if you're going to have peas or beans for dinner tonight, you're going to put them into a sack with water and carry it with you all day to help them soften up so that you can eat them for dinner without crunching your teeth. I tried that once, by the way. I didn't believe it. It's like, okay, let's just put it in the water and make soup. Yeah, crunchy peas. Dried meat, hard sausages, hard cheeses, dried mustard. There are so many references out there to mustard and dried mustard. And the ones that Talina made, they were the little balls about that big. I don't know if you can see my fingers, little balls. And then you just add a little bit of vinegar to them and you have mustard again. There's a new one I found, and I have it coming via Amazon, is something called Quart, Qurt, and it is a sheep's milk ball made of fermented sheep's milk that is a hard and dry traveling fluid, and you can make it in any size or shape apparently, but about this big was pretty common. And there's a story, and now I can't remember which war it was, but the Russians had captured people and were basically making them work, and the villagers started throwing white rocks at them. And the Russians thought, aha, white rocks. They don't like these guys. We don't like these guys. Turned out it was Quart. The villagers were throwing food to the starving prisoners. That's a modern reference, but still being used. I wish I had gotten it in time for this class because I could have told you whether or not it tastes yummy. Hardtack, certainly you can actually buy something similar to hardtack at stores like Winco. They call it pilot bread. It's a round cracker about this big and about that thick. And it's just flour and water and salt. And it's just been baked nice and hard. Horse feed you're going to need: oats, hay, peas, beans, straw. You can feed horses straw. A horse needs about 10 pounds of hay a day if he isn't sitting there grazing. And horses graze 20 to 22 hours a day if left alone. So you're going to have to carry feed for that horse that you're riding all day on your travels. Remember the 10-day rule. How far can I go without resupplying if I have to carry food for me and food for my animal? And that's a lot of feed, even if you're feeding them peas and beans, which was common for horses. Salt. You have to have salt. If you do not have salt for your animals while they're busy packing or being ridden or hauling a cart, they become unthrifty. They're not able to work and they will die. So you're going to have to carry salt in there just for your animals, if not for yourself. There's also something out there called horse bread, which you find references to. It is, as far as I've been able to find out so far, something so common that nobody wrote down what you put in it. My best guess from everything I've read about horse bread and dog bread is that it is a rough loaf made of coarse flour with peas and beans in it, like a peasant bread. Can't verify it, but that would be my guess for that. Somebody at a Western Tier War, we had a competition for horse bread, and she was new to cooking, but she had done her research on bread and taught us all things we didn't know about bread and why it was, big round with a hole in the middle, and the size of the round made differences as what kind of bread it was. But she made her best attempt at horse bread. And we left it sitting on the table all week and kept breaking off chunks to feed horses. And at the end of the week, the last chunk I broke in half was still moist in the middle. So she did a good job. She did a really nice job with that. All right, questions so far? Still doing good. I see no questions in the chat pod. All righty, moving on. Some things I have made for travel food is I've made what those in the 18th century would have called ash cakes, but it's basically flour and water. You can add salt or not. You can bake it in a low oven. You can put it on a griddle and bake it on low until it gets essentially hard. You can wrap it in the leaf, drop it in the ashes. You can make it pretty sticky. And then you have a small board. You can slap it on the board and put the board on its side by your fire, and it bakes it from the heat of the fire. And then you can peel it off. It might be a little sticky still underneath, but that's another way to very quickly use your hot fire to make some bread. And maybe you eat it tomorrow, because by the time you get down to coals, it's probably long past dinner time. But it's pretty easy and it's tasty. I made mine with seminola. Pretty yummy stuff. Lasted, I think it was 3 days before it wasn't tasty anymore. So that's not bad. Dried fish and meat. I have made salt cured salmon, which will last 3 to 5 days, depending on how hard a cure you make it. I have taken a chunk of beef roast that was about that big, that wide, and about 1 inch tall, and salt cured it with a little vinegar and salt and some spices. It's currently sitting in the freezer because when we get to go camping again, it's going to get dropped in hot water. We're going to see what happens when we try to make stew. You can, make candied orange peel to take with you. You can have your hard cheeses, your dry sausage, your summer sausage will last a long time. There's a couple of references. One of them is Italian and the other one is from the Hungarian cookbook about hemp seed. From what I can figure out, hemp seed was often eaten as a gruel, stew, pottage sort of thing on Fridays. It's high in protein and it was a non-meat dish. So there's something else you can throw into water and eat. There's a couple of really interesting ones out there. And these, aside from the court, I've tried all of these. Sampa, Tsampa, is from Tibet. You make your tea. And when you're all done with your tea, there's a little left in the bottom. You drop some barley flour into your cup. And you use your fingers and you roll the barley flour around the damp cup. Right? It cleans up the cup. It cleans your fingers. And then you can eat the dampened barley flour. The tea has yak milk in it. And I actually found a place online where I could get dried yak milk packets. I have a friend up in Ontario who's raising yaks, but she doesn't have yak milk yet or yak butter. So you can use that yak butter, yak milk. The dried stuff was actually yak butter. It doesn't taste bad. Sir Khalid and I messed around with it one day. And Hace or Haas, depending how you want to pronounce it, is that stuff with the dates and the nuts and the oil that you make little balls out of. That's a little harder to make dry enough so that it A, stays together, but B, doesn't stick on everything, but it is an actual travel food. There is a reference to South American dried meat called, are you ready for this? Charque. What word does that sound like to you? Not that dried meat wasn't known in Europe, it certainly was, but the word jerky comes from South American charque. And then we have pocket soup. Pocket soup is made by boiling down pig's feet and meat trimmings until you get this gelatinous mess that holds itself together. You can wrap it up, keep it in your pocket. That's why it's called pocket soup. Slice a piece off, drop it in hot water, and you have bouillon. So our ancestors had some interesting things that they ate. Dried orange peel, yeah, salmon cured, dates, figs, nuts, of course. The research I've read would indicate that our rich ancestors traveled with their own pots and pans and cooks. They would send their baker ahead a day to use the town ovens at the place they're going to stop next to bake bread so that when they arrived, they had fresh bread. But most of my research has been, what about everybody else who didn't have a big entourage and was carrying some of their own food, more of your individual pilgrim? If you take a look at some of the references, there's some books out there called A Day in Old Rome, and The Inns of Greece and Rome were written by a gentleman called Freebow. And they were written some time back, but he did some really interesting research about food and travel in those times. And he talks about street vendors in Greece. They sold sausages, omelets, and fig leaves. They had portable ovens. They did fruit pudding, and they made honey cakes. Are all in the research he has found. In Greece, those same food vendors sold oysters, fish, pork, cheese, goat. I never thought about street vendors in period, but why not, right? Pliny the Elder mentioned snow to cool drinks and keep fish fresh. So you want to use ice? Go for it. Pliny did. Inns are really interesting. There's all sorts of fascinating stuff about inns. You go back into Pliny's time, the inns had very specific names to describe the kind of structure it was. So you might have a private landowner that put up a shed, perhaps for his own use going around different properties, but also to take money from travelers who might not want to go to the larger inns. And the name of the structure told you ahead of time what kind of structure it was. Maybe it was a spot where you and your animals all slept in the straw. Well, that's entirely possible too, but we're just, yep, there's a lot of references out there for horse bread, but a lot of them are not real specific about what's in it. And I will look up that one too, because I'm always looking for more. But you might have a structure that was you and your animal sleeping in the same structure. You might have a tavern that did alcohol, but no food. Then there's another word for a tavern that did food and alcohol, but neither one of those had a place for you to sleep. So now we have a third word, a third taverna that had, we do food and drink and have a place for you to sleep. So that I thought was fascinating. Food was often a separate fee from sleeping in a bed, and we start out with sleeping on the floor. We had come up to rooms with giant beds where you might have 3, 4, 5 people sleeping in the same room, with no locks on the doors and no regulations about anything. A lot of the tavern fare for travelers was bread, meat, and beer. It was expensive. The travelers universally complain about the poor quality and about the expense. Itinerary after itinerary complains about this, but the funniest ones really are the Compostela ones. Pilgrims were supposed to get, by entitlement, a roof, a fire, clean water, and fresh bread, but they frequently did not at the hospices. They might get a floor of straw to sleep in and maybe a loaf of bread. Occasionally, if they happen to arrive on the right day, they might get some wine or some meat. The rich travelers did endowments, and that gave them a place to stay and the good food. But everybody else, not so lucky. And I lost track of where my notes were. Aha, here we go. So here's an English tavern recorded bill of fare. They sold beef, mutton, chicken, bacon, bread, beer, pigeon, rabbit, wine, oranges, and strawberries. I did not write down the year for that one, but a lot of these references are from the middle of the 15th century. 5th century inns were recorded as being dark and smoky, but in later periods, we had frequently a stable on the bottom with a hall above it and rooms for you to sleep. One good reason for that is all that heat from the animals is rising up under the floor to help warm the place. And they still do that in places in Sweden, I believe. There's somebody out there from Drachenwald who can tell me if people are still putting their stables underneath their house. I have a neighbor who built an 18-stall barn and the house is above it. Same idea. By 1345, you could get a single room. By 1380, innkeepers were required by statute to be responsible for your possessions. If you were staying there, you were supposed to get a key. And then we had this issue of dishonest innkeepers. And again, the itineraries are absolutely chock full of horror stories, some of which have been verified. So here's some of the really weird ones. There were 354 taverns in London in 1309. Some were in private homes, and there were laws to protect patrons, but they weren't very effective. Pliny mentions an innkeeper who killed his patron with a sword. Now, mind you, the patron is sleeping in bed with another patron. Stab, you're dead. Patron wakes up, thinks the guy he slept next to all night is still asleep, wanders away with his sword in the sheath. The innkeeper says, "You must stop him. You must catch him. He has killed my patron." And fortunately for the guy who was innocent, they determined that he was innocent, and it was the innkeeper who had killed the other patron. Out of things like that, we started getting, if someone dies in your inn, you do not get their belongings to help keep innkeepers from being tempted. There was an 11th century account of an innkeeper who murdered 88 people who came to stay at his inn. They found the bodies buried out and back. In 1390, there was a burglary recorded. All they did was break through the wall. You had to have walls, but they didn't have to be good walls. So he just broke through the wall and stole the things in the next room. There was an ordinance in the 14th century that, as I said, prohibited the innkeepers from keeping, and a hefty fine if they were discovered to be doing it. In the time of the Emperor Theodosius, an innkeeper had a mill. Patrons kept disappearing. They left, they never got where they were going, they never got home. They found that he was dropping them through a trap door into the mill where they became slaves. He either sold them off or they worked in the mill. So traveling was not a good thing to do by yourself. Okay, here.
I'm still freaked out by killing your patrons and keeping their ingredients or their stuff had a hefty fine.
Yeah.
Just a hefty fine. That's all.
Well, you could be, yeah. But if I don't know what happened to him, he died in the woods. I have his stuff, see? It wasn't so much
That's
killing
true.
them in the end, but yeah. Yeah. I think the whole thing, we have to make a don't do that law.
Every law has a name.
And these are, if you're traveling, it's not the guy in your town that's staying in your inn, it's some stranger. And strangers are weird. If you're talking about the Compostela, there's an account in there in which the writer talks about these evil people in this town and how the Duke needs to do something. And so that the Duke can do something, he's going to list all their names. And he lists all the names of these terrible, terrible people who live in this town and how mean and terrible they are. There's other accounts in there about the people who live here. They talk funny and they dress funny and they smell funny and they eat really weird food. There's this stream where don't let your horses drink because if they do, they will die immediately from drinking the water from the stream. It's just on and on and on about the things that were recorded on this one pilgrimage. So in 1360, there's an English ordinance because counterfeiters and forgers kept meeting in taverns. So they made an ordinance that the innkeeper had to swear an oath that he would only take good coinage. Another one, like, how are you going to know for sure, right? So we actually went through that faster because you guys didn't ask me any questions in the middle, and we actually didn't get off track. I'm amazed. Wow. We always get off track. We go wandering down side streets. It's amazing.
And now we have time to wander down side street.
We do. We have lots of time to wander down side streets. What would you like to know?
I actually have a question.
Sure.
And some of this is, I think, mythology that we pick up from early historians. How prevalent were the use of, things like what we call now hand pies in terms of traveling food?
I don't know anything specific about that, but here's my guess. And this comes from also talking to Stephen Payne, who did a modern pilgrimage. First couple of days, he had things like that. He had hand pies. He had a joint of meat. He said they did not keep well in his pack because he had a pilgrim's pack. He didn't have anything modern. He made all his own clothes. He went barefoot. He said, actually, that was easier because then he had warm, dry socks and boots, to wear at night. But and he was doing this in January in England. He said they didn't hold together. And if you think about it, a meat pie is just a pastry with stuff in it. So it's something I might buy from a vendor and eat now, but how am I going to carry it in a loose pack? Everything I've read indicates that it's more durable foods, dried meats, dried fish, hard sausage, hard cheese, maybe a ham or a leg of lamb, but not something that's a pastry. Nothing that I've found that I can say yay or nay about that, but just my sense of it from everything else I've read.
And my question is, so you've listed all of this stuff. How do you carry that, either in your pack or on horseback?
So pilgrims tend to have what we would think of as a big strappy satchel, a messenger bag kind of a thing. They also might have, you've all seen them at the Ren Fair, the little basket with the straps, some kind of a basket. If you're on horseback, You can have packs coming over the horse's back. If you've got a pack horse, you've got, like I said, they could carry 300 to 400 pounds in a pack if it was a little mule. So you can carry it all that way. Chaucer certainly shows people with what look like wheelbarrows,
Oh,
little hand carts.
okay.
From what Stephen Payne told me, he slept in his cloak under trees in January. I'm still befuddled by that. I can't imagine doing that.
Yeah.
So from your research, did you find that there were certain times of year that pilgrimage tended to happen during? Did they avoid like the high heat of summer and do things across the winter months? Or were you looking at that kind of data?
A little bit. And mostly after talking with Stephen about that, it was like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, and went back and looked. So if you have to get permission from your Lord, whomever that is, and from the church to go on pilgrimage, no one's letting you go during harvest. No one's letting you go during planting. So there are going to be times of year where you might get permission and not others. And that I would think would be the fall and winter times, which is what he found too. And I went back and I looked and went, yeah, that does seem to be an accurate time frame. If you're talking about Europe. Now, there's only so many places you can go look, right? And I've been forbidden from going and looking more because I really have to finish this. So I know. Yeah, I keep writing and then I add stuff and I write some more and I add some more. Like it's going to be its own TI by the time I'm done.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is. It's not TI. What's the? I went away.
CA.
Yay.
CA.
Thank you. Yes.
I
TA.
completely heard CA, so it's all
Yeah,
good.
we all knew what you meant.
Okay, good. Because I was like, no, that's not the right word.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be a complete anachronist when it's done. I tend to write like 800 to 1200 words or a whole bunch. I don't write in that 12 to 2000. If I'm going to write that much, I'm going to write a whole bunch. So, so it makes sense that looking at just Europe, because I haven't had a chance to go look elsewhere why people traveled and what would be their reasons, that would be, at a time when you weren't needed on the land, or if you were a member of the merchant class to the nobility when you weren't making your living in other ways. So pilgrimage happened elsewhere.
How long did a pilgrimage usually take?
He went 200 miles and it took him 6 weeks.
Round
where-
trip?
No, one way. He was walking barefoot.
Mhm.
Do I keep saying barefoot? Keep saying barefoot. Yikes.
Barefoot in the
January.
snow, uphill both ways.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm right.
There's a group of Calentiri that went on the Compostela Santiago, and they took about 6 weeks. Now they were a bunch of school teachers, so they did it in the summer.
Yeah.
Right.
Modern
Right.
lives and such. But yeah, about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Where did they start?
Oh,
Partly at the Pyrenees, and
yeah, I don't know 100%. It's been a couple years since this happened, and then I have someone in my shire who did this in her 20s,
Mhm.
and she walked. She also took the bus a little bit.
Mhm.
I think there's certain rules, like you have to walk a certain amount and stuff like that. But
It's
she
a
did
long
it.
way.
Yeah, she did it very much medieval style as well.
So here's another book you might be interested in. It's called Crusade, by Horse to Jerusalem. And the gentleman who wrote it is Tim Severin, Severin. He did not ride when he started this thing. He's done a couple of recreation of trips. And this was one of them. It was, the name escapes me, Duke. Wait a minute. I'd have to find it. It was a Duke in Europe, and he followed his crusade path. So he got a Argenay horse, which is in France. Currently, they're used for meat. They are monstrous and short-legged. They're very funny looking horses. Hauled it back to Ireland, where he had a friend who actually rode, who helped him train the horse. And then he discovered why people don't use draft horses to ride for the most part, because he's really uncomfortable. So then he got Skippy, and he rode Skippy, and Carty is the one that carried all the stuff. And he talks about his whole trip going to Jerusalem. It's a fascinating read. It's done in modern times, but if you want to read another long journey and all the things they came across, ill-fitting saddles, bad food, the heat, the horses getting sick, it's a kind of a cool book to read. It's less detail oriented from the research side, but it's really still kind of an interesting thing to go through. There's a bunch of other books. Hang on a second. And I would put this up, and I have a bibliography, but this one is Travel and Travelers of the Middle Ages, another really nice one. Well, then we have Pilgrimage, and we have Inns of the Middle Ages, and The Devil's Horseman, which talks about, I didn't mention them, a couple of friars. There was a big Jesuit push going into Mongolia to convert people. And these two friars have a beautiful itinerary that they talk all about. In The Devil's Horseman, they only just barely mention it, but they went about 18 miles a day, changed horses frequently, and they talk about their trip in that. The Inns of Greece and Rome, A Day in Old Rome, Travel in the Ancient World. There's a bunch of books out there. The Travels of Sir John de Mandeville are kind of fun. Oh, and then this one. This one I found. And if you don't know it, first of all, you all should know about EBSCO-host, EBSCO host. If you teach at a school or a university, you have access to the good version. However, if you have a library card, and you all have a library card, right? You can use the good version from your public library online. And there are all sorts of research journals out there. You want to find out what medieval games people played? There is a sports medieval journal out there. It's like, wow. But you can also do interlibrary loan. If you find a really cool book and you go, gosh, I wonder if this book is even worth spending $75 on. You can find a library that has it, and your local library will send for it. Now, they might make you read it in the library. They might not let you take it home. Depends on the book. I've gotten a chance to take them home and a chance not. But you can then go through the book itself and see if it's something you want to spend. And this one, you can see that. The Great Household in Late Medieval England by C.M. Woolgar, W-O-O-L-G-A-R, is fantastic. It has bills of lading and itineraries and discussions of all sorts of stuff in here. For example, there's a section in here in which, if you know how much flour a household used and of what types, you can determine how many human beings, dogs, and horses they had in that household by the amount of flour they bought. I mean, just stuff you go, oh, well, of course, but I never thought of it. This book is like that. As you can see all my little stickers. Yeah. I scribble in my books, but I also make stickers for it. There's something here you want. And like this page, there's the sticker, and there's a word on the side that says, this page has stuff on this thing in it. Because I don't highlight the words, I just write in the margins. But consider doing that for some books that maybe you only want to, we would never do this because it's illegal. Xerox a couple of pages out of it, along with the cover and title page, so that you can say, this is where I got it and here's what it said.
As long as it is for personal use, it is not illegal.
But
Just to be clear.
We would never, ever do something that would be illegal. So don't do anything.
Canada, it is completely legal to copy up to 30% of a book.
To 30% of
Wow.
it.
So in the United States, as long as it is for personal use, there's no actual number that's given. But it has to be for personal use.
Yeah, or educational. I can use it in a classroom.
No, if you're going to distribute it in a classroom, it's covered by, so universities got slammed on a few decades ago when I was in graduate school. If you are going to distribute entire articles, photocopies of them, you have to do that. If
Yeah.
it's something that's site licensed to your university, you can include a link. So if EBSCOhost is site
Right.
licensed, you can use it. But if it's your photocopies and you post it even in Canvas that or Blackboard or the equivalent, that's actually a copyright violation. And I would never do that. Of course not.
Ever. But
Ever.
you can use it in a classroom if you're not keeping it or recording it in any way. So I'm not recording my classroom. I'm just showing it to you guys. I'm not distributing it. It's still kind of, it falls in that category of personal educational use because it's not permanently available anywhere. We just talked about it on Tuesday at 10. Yeah, and then I send you off to the right place to go see the rest of it. It's
So to
tricky. It's tricky.
I would like to think no company would be that worried about a title page so somebody can get all the exact details to go buy their very expensive book.
Yes, and I had a whole stack for a long time of books from the University of Nevada, Reno, where I copied out the title page and the ISBN number was handwritten and why I had it so that I could go back later and find the book. Yeah.
So to focus a little back on travel foods a little
Yeah.
bit, just to focus a little bit, what was the most interesting travel food that you found that modernly we would go, really, you would take that on a pilgrimage versus something else? Like, I mean, if you think about it, the dry fruits and the dry, people use that for camping stuff now. Like, did you find something that you went, I never thought that you could do that, but if you step back and look at it, was it something that you could use?
I think finding the ubiquitousness of dried meat and that references to chunks of dried meat, not just jerky stuff, but chunks of dried meat that you could carry along, drop into a pot and make into soup. No, I take that back. Pocket soup. Since we said the word soup, pocket soup was the weirdest thing. But
Okay,
oh, that is so cool. Pocket soup.
A medieval version of bouillon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Except
okay,
it's
so,
gelatinous instead of powder. But yeah, it's still bouillon.
okay.
I thought pocket soup was so clever. A lot of the other stuff, it's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And oh, we eat that now and it's been around since forever. So of course they ate that. You know, so many of the German sausages are dry sausage, that kind of thing.
Well, that's partially, so one of the food chemistry things is that if you look at something called water activity, what you'll find is that as you cook meat, so cooked meat versus not cooked meat,
Right.
where the hand pies come in, versus dried meat has a different water activity, and below a certain water activity, things are stable, are shelf stable. And as long as you don't let them get wet, right? So that's one of the things that we need to remember is when we rehydrate things, that water activity comes back.
Yeah, you gotta scrape the mold off the top. John, so you had something about
mold gets inhibited in a couple of different ways.
It does, but just scrape the excess off and yeah, crush fingers.
So did you
hey, hang on a second. I want to answer John over here. He talks about cough and pie dough. So a couple of things about dough. There's dough you eat, and there's dough that becomes a container for what you eat. So the container stuff is kind of hard, and it's just flour and water basically, that holds the stew. It's a pot, it's a cup, it's a whatever. So there's more than one kind of dough. So what was the question?
Did you find that, because I hear you're talking about like meats primarily, did you find that there were many vegetables in that list, or would they buy that on the way? And then another question was, did you find any seasonings aside from salt?
Oh, every seasoning you can imagine is in the list. I didn't bother to list them all out, but you've got peppers, all different kinds of peppers, and salt and ginger and cinnamon. I mean, they're all there that you take with you. And then the first question about vegetables, you're going to find dried vegetables, your peas and beans, your legumes that are coming with you. I didn't see much in the way of statements about fresh vegetables. It's something I should probably go look for, but as you're going through towns, you could pick up fresh vegetables are, if you look at our recipes for foods, like the Hungarian cookbook, the emphasis on vegetable in things is not as common as we're expecting. So your meat dish has onions in a sauce.
Mhm.
You know, your stew has onions and maybe some carrots. You know, some turnips. Those are really nice. If you're vegetarian, this won't work for you, but you could do it with a vegetable broth. There's a really nice dish of turnips from Martino that is, cook your turnips, chunk them up, cook them in beef broth, mush them up, and add some fatty meat and salt. And I gave it to my next door neighbor as my taste tester because she does not like turnips, not even a little bit. And I said, if you don't like it, just tell me, I don't care, right? So that was yummy. I had it for dinner. See, you can eat turnips. On Juana Isabea's quest for period food is yummy. She just had period food and it was yummy. But you could certainly do something like that with a vegetable broth instead, and you know, add some spices, and you'd still have a period dish. You know, we had vegetarians in period, but so many of the recipe books don't account for them very much. Stews don't have potatoes and carrots and peas and corn and the things I put into my stews. Okay. Yeah, lots of spices have antimicrobial inhibition. This is true. You know, a lot of the candied orange peel talks about wrapping it in ginger, in the sense of powdered ginger being in like layers to help preserve it. I just stuck mine in the freezer because I want to take it with me when we get to go camping again. It's a pain in the neck to make that much. And it was done with Seville oranges, very tiny ones. We don't get Seville oranges in Reno. And inevitably the weather is bad the one weekend that everyone tells me they're blooming or they're fruiting up and I can go get some and I can't get over the pass. So
Yeah, that's usually when we get the really devastating hailstorms out here.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Just as a reminder, we just have a few minutes left and then the 2 o'clock classes will be starting. So I wanted to thank Siobhan for her wonderful class.
And what they would be drinking in pilgrimage. Seems to be small beer. When I grew up in Ohio, it was 3-2 beer. 18-year-olds could drink 3-2 beer. It's called small beer in period. And a friend of mine who knows more about brewing beer in period than you have ever wanted to know. It is awesome to listen to him. Talks about beer before malt, which is kind of an interesting discussion too. So I think that we all believe that nobody drank water, but they did. And you know, any kind of the Mediterraneans have a form of mead that's much lighter than the European version or what we're used to drinking as mead. There's some indication this, I just found this out last week. Our European ancestors drank tree sap, maple tree sap, not maple sugar. Can't find that they ever made it into sugar, but they would tap the tree and drink the sap. That was interesting. So yeah, I mean, I went to like, could we have maple syrup on food? Well, I can't find syrup, but I can find maple tree sap and other tree saps.
Huh.
I would not recommend pine tree sap. Too much turpentine. Anything else?
Yeah.
All right, so I have some things